So next slide is the cap structure. 60 million shares outstanding, 65 million fully diluted. At 17 cents gives us a market cap of about $10 million. I think it's trading at 19 now. All of the warrants and options are well out of the money from the last iteration of this company before I cleaned it all up. Used to be called ANGold. We've still got some interesting assets in Chile where there's 2 projects and one has a hole on it that's 270 meters of 0.8 grams per ton gold or something like that. That will be valuable one day. It perhaps isn't now, but we're sitting on it. And then we've got 10 million shares in a company called Minus Metals, which is more or less a shell, but we sold them some American gold projects last year. Okay, so looking at the basin now, the Athabasca Basin, we all know that, of course, over here on the eastern side, those are where all the big guys are, you know, the Camicos, the Denisons, the Oranos, ISO and UEC. Cigar Lake and McArthur River are some of the famous uranium deposits over there. But if you rewind 12, 13 years, I go over here to the southwest, got Fission and NextGen. Those weren't known about that before. No, those really weren't known about before starting in 2012, 2013, 2014 is when those got really drilled out and discovered. Before that whole area was kind of like the Wild West, and a lot of people didn't want to look over there because they didn't think anything was over there. But here we are today, and there's been billions of dollars of value creation. I get the same feeling up here on our projects on the northern rim of the basin. That's where we're at. It's kind of like going back in time where like all the signs are there. It just hasn't really been explored, you know, in a serious way. So I'm just going to zoom into that next. All right, this is looking at our projects. I'll just briefly introduce each one and how we got them. So these ones here, this one, and this one is ground that we staked in September. But I started looking around and thinking, okay, well, how do we add more meat to this? Because staked claims are great, but you know, it takes a long time to get them drill ready. So was able to do 2 separate. Was able to eventually do options on. Or take over options on this one, Strike, Mermac, and Sundog, in that, okay, these are the projects now that have that exploration spend and a lot of drill-ready targets. And where they are drilled, the preliminary drilling has some good smoke that I'll show you about. But just taking a step back, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Anywhere where there's one of these little dots, that's a uranium showing, usually at surface. And you can go and sample like really high grade, like 10%, 27%. There's a hole here that's off the property, but 5.7% U308 over 8.5 meters drilled by Cameco. This one right here is called the Gunner deposit. It's 18 million pounds of past production between the 1950s and the 1980s. And at one time, that was the largest uranium producer in the world. Was discovered in 1952 and was the largest uranium producer in the world by 1955, which is just like, it was a different time. And we really needed uranium back then. But anyways, long story short, all of these old showings, that's in the type of thing for the most part, that's like the wrong type of rocks, where it's probably going to be like 0.2, 0.3%, something like that, and not really what we're looking for today. But all the signs that we want to see for modern deposits are there. And what do I mean, the right type of rocks versus the wrong type of rocks? It used to be, you know, way back when in the 1950s, they would concentrate on these little pods here. This is just a cartoon where you'd get, you know, a guy would walk over, you know, an outcrop with a scintillometer. And if it started picking up radioactivity, he would start digging around. And sometimes he would find something, but most of the time it would just be very small. But what they didn't know about and weren't even able to see were these graphitic faults that host the big basement hosted deposits like the NextGens, like the Fissions, because those weather low, they sit under valleys, and that completely masks the radioactive signature, except for a couple little exceptions where they did find some interesting stuff. But that's really the idea, where all these rocks, these good rocks, these target rocks are there, and look fertile, but just not really looked at seriously, really ever. Okay, so to talk about the projects more specifically now, start with what's called Mermac and what's called Sundog. So here is the Sundog project. This is under option from Standard Uranium. And then the Mermac project is under option from Fortune Bay Corp. Where putting these, when they're not put together, it's harder to look big picture. But when you put them together, you've got a trend of 30 kilometers along which we've got multiple graphitic EM conductors, and a lot of smoke on them. So anywhere from 1.69% there to 8.2%, 8.8% there in a boulder, to 15,000 counts per second on a handheld scintillometer, on top of a radioactive spring. So like when I say radioactive spring, it's like you go up and there'll be a groundwater seep and it'll be heavily radioactive. That's a really good sign. So these things are more or less leaking uranium along their 30-kilometer trend. You've also got, moved down here onto the Sundog project, you've got 9.5% there at Stewart Island, 12% plus there at Johnston Island. I'm cherry picking those numbers, like it's anywhere from 0.1 to that. But what's important there is that that's mineralization that's it's in the sandstone above the unconformity. So we call that perched mineralization. And of course, the real target is at the unconformity and probably below it in the basement. So when you've got that smoke, that perched mineralization above the unconformity, that's a really good sign. And these really need to be tested pretty significantly. At Haven, that's a hole that Standard Uranium drilled about a year ago, and got something like 0.05% U3O8 over 10 centimeters, so like that much. And it's like, well, if you just look at that, on its take it face value, it's like, well, who cares? But looking at the core photos, looking at all the chemistry, it looks really interesting. Like maybe they just missed something. So we've got to do a lot of work on both of these projects to hopefully make discoveries. But let me zoom into this now, Mermac. So that's what we're looking at on Mermac, and everywhere where there's one of these bullseyes, that's a drill target. And it looks like it's a bit of a shotgun approach where we've just, it's spread everywhere, but that's really not the case. Each one of these is chosen very carefully based on a number of factors. We've got the EM conductors are these long strips. The color in the background is gravity, so we're looking for overlapping EM conductors, gravity anomalies, cross-cutting structures that can localize the uranium deposits. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but a lot has gone into those. So what we're going to start on there, well, there's 45 targets that you're looking at right now. 28 of them are new, and 17 are following up on little sniffs. Like, okay, here's 0.18 in the right rocks, over a small amount, but it's there. Right? And when you hit something like that 0.18, even though it's only 10 centimeters, you could be 50 meters away from a big deposit if you're in the right environment, for sure. So we want to follow up on stuff like that, but there's also a lot more to do. So we're going to start with this one, 4,000 meters and 20 holes. And I think there'll be more to come, but that's a really good start where, okay, the 20 holes there, 4,000 meters, that's an average depth of 200 meters per hole. It's going to be, say, $500 a meter Canadian all in to drill here, like all in. So that's $100,000 per shot on goal. And I think that's really good. I think that's probably leading, although I haven't looked at everyone. But what gets us to that is that you're not drilling through 200, 300, 400, or 500 meters of sandstone. Here, the targets start 20 meters down, and so you get to really maximize the chances of success by drilling as many holes with less money. So like it's the same amount of money goes a lot further in this situation is the point I'm trying to make, which I think is very important. How does this area compare to, say, the Patterson corridor? Which myself, Garrett, we really had front row seats to these billions of dollars of value creation and spending a lot of time there. Where, okay, well, between Fission and NextGen and Spitfire, which is small, there's 13 kilometers of strike there. We're looking at 30 kilometers. It's right on the basin margin, just like NextGen, just like this one, except it's on the other side, so it's a bit, reversed. We're looking north instead of in it and south. The orientation of the conductors is the same. I just see a lot of similarities. But that being said, I'm not trying to say one is going to be the other, and not at all necessarily. But this is the type of shot we're trying to take here. I'm going to skip this one. It's just a history of the Patterson corridor and where we might be at, but I'm going to skip this one. The other project I'm going to talk about is the Strike project. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, guys, because it's basically the same flavor of what I just showed you. So you kind of have the idea here. But what I do want to point out is that this zone called the Tena zone, that is in the right rocks. and produced something like 1,000 tons in the 1950s at 0.6 to 3.5. So like higher grade than all the stuff around it. And, we just think that that's like a proof of concept, like, hey, the right type of mineralization really is here. Now, where's the big one? This one's similar. We'll do a little less work here, planning 1,000 meters and 5 holes. I think there's going to be more targets to develop here, though, as well. So what are we doing coming up? We've acquired this ground, ready to take advantage of the previous exploration spend. We're just finishing up this financing now, and then as soon as that's done, I'll start signing exploration contracts. We have anything from geophysics, which we're going to start probably in March, to drilling, which we're planning to start in early to mid May. I have a drill contractor lined up. It's somebody that I've worked with before, actually at NextGen, who was very good there. He's now out on his own, so he's got my deposit, and we're going to get him finalized here after we close. And then from there, it's just a matter of doing our work and systematically approaching these targets, and hopefully getting something. Not quite lastly, almost lastly, valuation. Right now we're at a little over $10 million valuation. I think that's probably 12. But if you look at like a good comp is probably Cosa. They're double that or in that neighborhood, and doing kind of a similar thing, except they're on the eastern margin of the basin, so kind of need to drill through that sandstone. But look, that's really not to criticize at all. The trade-off is that in that part of the basin, you kind of it's a lot more established. We already know there's a lot of uranium around there, whereas for us we don't. So it's new. But the other one I'd just like to point out here is that fission, or F3, excuse me, another discovery for the fission guys, which is great. But I think 12 or 18 months ago, maybe it was 18 months ago, I mean, that was like a 20 or a 30 cap company, and now they made a discovery, it's 230. So again, there's just a special power in Canadian uranium discovery that seems to, it's always been like that since people started looking for uranium. The management team now, myself, Galen, if in case it wasn't apparent already, I'm a geologist, going back about 15 years. And between 2014 and 2018, I was managing the drilling for NextGen, and helped lead that drill out of that deposit then. So, and know at least what I'm looking for, I think it's fair to say. Carson, our CFO, Brandon Bonifacio, some of you may know as a director, and is CEO of Nevgold, and then Ronnie Zimmerman is our lawyer in Chile. So this is going to be probably changing and becoming more uranium focused over the next few months. And then the exploration team. I mentioned this a little bit at the beginning of the presentation, but Garrett Ainsworth is coming on as an advisor and going to be helping on this, I think, pretty significantly. We're all very excited about this, so it makes it easy for us to all want to work together. He's currently the CEO of District Metals, but was formerly my boss at NextGen as VP Exploration and Development. We work together very closely there. Dale Varan is one of the optioners through Fortune Bay Corp. He is going to, both Dale, Sean, and Gareth come from the optioners, and they're going to be staying on as project operators. So it's kind of nice in that we all work together and not in silos, and they get to continue with their work, and there's no break in the knowledge. I think that's very important. But anyways, Dale was formerly VP Exploration at Denison, involved in discovery of over 70 million pounds. That would be in the Phoenix and the Griffin zones there. His geologist, Gareth Garlick, used to work for a service company called Mineral Services, and they worked very closely on things like the Triple R for fission in the early days, the J Zone, and then lastly Sean Hilliker from Standard Uranium. He worked under me actually very closely at NextGen Energy, and it was the first guy to do some of the academic geology work. So he understands this mineralization very well, is the takeaway from that. Option terms. So two options here. The first one is the Sundog project. That one is $650,000 in cash, $650,000 in stock, and a $6.5 million work commitment over 3 years for 100%. We've made the first two payments, the $200,000 in cash and the $200,000 in stock. The other one is for the Strike and Mermac projects combined. 1.35 million in cash, 2.15 million in stock, and a $6 million work commitment over 3.5 years for 70%. And people ask me, how come one's 100 and one's 70? Well, there was just this optioner at Fortune Bay. There was just a little more meat on this, so they asked to retain 30%. But the way I look at this is like, okay, well, for this price, we're taking advantage of $7.6 million in exploration spend. That really, like, that's money in the ground, number one, but it shortcuts us to drill targets and hopefully discovery.